Okay, in this interview, we have a very interesting individual. His name is Robert Breedlove, and Robert Breedlove is a Bitcoin investor. More than anything, he's a very interesting macroeconomic thinker, philosopher, and we're going to talk about a lot of interesting things. What is money? What is government? And so right before we were about to drop in, you were about to talk about your mission, and I thought that would be a kind of interesting way to start. So first of all, make sure you hit the like button on either side. And Robert, what were you saying your mission was? I thought maybe that'd be a cool place to start.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. So as I hope we'll fully express in our conversation today, I think at the bottom of what Bitcoin truly represents is a humanitarian movement. The current monetary system, as I've argued in much of my writing, is essentially an institution of time theft, right? As we learned in, I know you said you dropped out of Economics 101, but anyone that went through Economics 101 learned that monopolies are a bad idea, right? Monopolies are great for the monopolist. They can maximize their own profit, but they externalize all the cost on everyone else. So it's not good. And what we have in the market for money today is a monopoly. Central banking centrally plans and controls the money supply and the interest rate. And that externalizes a lot of negative socioeconomic consequences on the world. And so what Bitcoin represents is a humanitarian movement back towards freedom. It gives people to select a money that no one else can manipulate. No one else can weaponize to steal wealth from others. And that's what we use today, this paper in our pocket. It is a tool for reallocating wealth. That's all it's good for. We hear in the news that the central bank in the US is printing $3 trillion in 2020 to quote unquote save the economy. And central banks around the world are doing the same thing. But all this does is we have to understand what this means. These paper certificates are claims on the savings of the world. And the savings of the world are the goods, services, and knowledge it contains, right? Money itself is not, it's just a receipt to redeem one of these things. So when you increase the number of receipts on the same pool of savings, you're just diluting the value of the dollars, right? And when you centrally, as they do in central banking, they print new money and allocate it to who the central bank selects, who the politicians select first, it is effectively reallocating wealth away from the bottom, away from the people using fiat currency as a store of value, and reallocating it to those who receive the newly printed money first. Mm-hmm. You can Google the Cantillon effect for a little bit more on this, but in essence, it is a pyramid scheme. This is stealing from the poor and giving to the rich. It's exactly what it is. And it's a bitter pill to swallow because we all use money, we all think about money all the time. It's a very important tool in our lives. But I'm here today to tell you that the monetary system we have today is one of the most corrupt systems, if not the most corrupt system in the history of the world. It is con artistry at scale. And it's hidden in plain sight, right? We all use it. Few of us understand it. And the central banks depend on our passivity and our ignorance to continue to perpetrate this scheme. So Bitcoin shatters all that. It's a form of money that the supply cannot be changed. It is universally accessible. Anyone can enter the market, exit the market. You can store your wealth anonymously. You can put it in your brain. You can put it on a sheet of paper. You can split your private key, which represents the claim to your Bitcoin, and share it amongst your circle of trust, right? You can do these ultra high security custody arrangements. So it's a brand new financial system, essentially, and it's not controlled by anyone, and it can't be manipulated by anyone at the expense of others. So at the bottom of what it represents, I think it's truly a massive humanitarian movement for freedom.
Yeah, I agree with you on it, on everything you're saying. I am an investor in Bitcoin. My largest holding is in silver. I love the supply and demand fundamentals. One of the other things that I think is greatly underestimated too is, you know, we say we have an archaic money system that favors the elites. We have an archaic voting system that does the same thing. And if anything, in my opinion, blockchain and Bitcoin shows us there's no reason we shouldn't have a non-tamper voting system that makes us, we're in such a bad position because of the voting system that we have. And I think that's another thing that I hope changes sometime soon. And along the lines of what you were saying, one of my good friends, his name's Christopher Irons. He's Quoth the Raven on Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he says that the ultimate deep state is the central banking system. They go along the lines with what you said.
That's absolutely correct. Maybe I could give a little background as to how we got to paper currency. I think that's very useful.
Please.
So,
and is it true when you go into it? Is it true Chinese communism was the first paper money system ever? Is that a true statement or no?
I think fiat currency was originated in China, like most things, most technologies historically. China got there first. Right. But this experiment called fiat currency has been tried for, I think the first one was BC China, so thousands of years. And they all fail in one way. They all fail in one very particular way, and that is hyperinflation. And I think in today's discussion, we'll help flesh out why. So money is just a tool, although a lot of people think it's mysterious. It's just a tool for moving value across time and space. And historically, another way to think about this is inside of any trading economy, the most tradable thing is money. It's just the most liquid asset in a trading network, right? Even in prisons today, if people are trading cigarettes, that's money, right, for that economy.
Right.
So historically, the market favored the asset, which exhibited 5 critical properties. The asset which was most divisible, most durable, most portable, most recognizable, and most scarce tended to become money. And I'm gonna do this kind of high-level version that glosses over a lot of history, but hopefully delivers the main points. So, of all the tools in the world, we tried different forms of money throughout time, right? We tried salt, we tried cattle, we tried glass beads. All these different forms of money have been experimented with in different economies. But the world came to settle on metals, monetary metals, as the best tool for the job when it came to money. Metals are the most divisible, the most durable, most recognizable, most portable of all the other tools in the world. And of the monetary metals, gold was the most scarce. So another way to say this, again, money is a tool for moving value across space and time. Gold was the best tool for moving value across time. And this property was rooted, or this function, the store value function, was rooted in the property of scarcity. So gold, as the most scarce money, meant that it was the most resistant to inflation, right? That if I hold 10 ounces of gold, I know with maximal confidence that I have a guaranteed fraction of that total supply. Now, the total supply of gold tended to increase about 2% per year, but it was reliably low, right? It was no matter how much time and effort we put towards its production, we couldn't increase its supply any more than that. So gold was the most inflation-resistant metal, and it became naturally selected in the market as money because it best fulfilled those 5 functions and it was the most scarce. The problem with gold is that it's physical. So it suffers in terms of moving value across space, right? It's heavy, it's expensive to secure. You can't beam it around the world. You have to put it on a wagon and secure it.
Right.
So although it was really good at storing value across time, it wasn't so great at moving value across space. So a business function arose around gold, which was basically a warehousing function. So you would put your gold on deposit with a warehouse. They would issue you a certificate called a warehouse receipt that was redeemable for that gold, paper certificate. And then you could basically use that paper certificate to trade, and everyone knew that you could trust the warehouse to go back and redeem the money whenever you needed it. So we were augmenting this technological failing of gold by abstracting it into paper currency. So now it would hold value across time by being inflation resistant, and we can move value across space because it was just paper, right? And then later, we abstracted that paper currency into electronic form, right, in the telecommunications revolution, and now we can really move it across space. The problem this introduced was that it forced us to trust the warehouse, right? We had to trust that that warehouse had as much gold as they said they had, as the paper said that they had, and they would not print more of these receipts than their gold reserves could justify. So this led to the centralization of gold custody, right? All of a sudden, gold is increasingly held by fewer and fewer hands because the economies of scale of moving gold with paper basically drove that centralization. And this became a target for governments to commandeer, right? Because if you can control the money, you control the world. Again, as I've argued in some of my writing, another way to think about it is as a token for human time, right? If you have money, you can claim someone's time, either to make you something, to provide you a service, or to render some knowledge to you. So the money, the old saying, time is money. Well, money is time, right? It's redeemable for human time. So when governments centralized and commandeered this money, they established a monopoly on top of it,
right?
And allowed them.
And many people that listen to are very familiar with. Ultimately, that's led to a legitimate manipulation of that gold, right? So then it even. Then they get even more power than they had before. And so carry on. It's just when you say that, it's interesting when you see you started with the warehouse, then it turns into this master manipulation plan of the price that you have today. So it's an interesting way.
Yeah, it gets even worse. So they've centralized gold hoards. They've issued paper redeemable for the gold, but now they have full trust and power, right? So naturally, the warehouse, which it's evolved into the central bank by this point.
Right.
They start to issue more paper than their gold reserves can justify. So they're counterfeiting currency at this point.
Right.
They're no longer producing money, they're producing a debt certificate, but there's no reserves to back up the debt, right? So they're just internalizing the profits from interest from creating this money, but there's no real money to back it up. And when people come to redeem, you've heard of a bank run, right? That's when too many people come to redeem the money that's not there, right? A bank run shouldn't be an issue. If you're a true full reserve bank and you have the money you say you have, a bank run's no problem. People just come and redeem their money and you have the money in the vault, and that's no problem. The bank run becomes an issue when the bank is lying to you, right? They've perpetrated this lie called fractional reserve banking, where they only have, say, 10% of the reserves that they represent to have. Fast forward again, we get to 1971. Following the end of World War II, a lot of the gold had ended up in North America. So North America became a geographic safe haven for gold from Nazi plundering. So every time Hitler would invade a country, he would go straight to their central bank, right? Which points toward not only the funding mechanism, but the purpose of a lot of warfare in the world was fighting over money, clearly. And once enough gold had been secured here in North America, we decided to enter World War II and finish the job, declare ourselves the victor, and rewrite the global economic order at the Bretton Woods Conference, where the United States would be the central bank of the world, effectively. So the dollar would be pegged to gold, and then all the other currencies in the world would be pegged to the U.S. dollar, which gave the U.S. basically full control of the at least the monetary economy in the world.
Right.
And this gave us a weird arrangement where we could just print money as the U.S., send these certificates overseas, and they send us goods and services, right?
Right.
So we had a free call option to buy whatever we wanted from the world. The world became our production factory. And then you get to 1971, countries, again, trying to redeem their gold. I think that the last straw was with France or Germany.
Right.
And Nixon basically said, no more. We're moving off of the gold standard temporarily in the 1971 Nixon shock, and we never went back. We're now in this, we've moved on to fiat currency, which is just an uncollateralized debt certificate, and it's undergoing slow motion default while its use is forced on people. People are given no other option of what money to use except fiat currency.
Especially when you have to pay taxes in it, right?
That's right. And so this pyramid scheme is now fully global. Central banks can produce more money at will, right? So anytime they're chosen, the institutions nearest the fiat currency spigot suffer losses. Those losses are papered over by new fiat currency production. So it's heads I win, tails.
Are you saying like a new loan or something to help out those types of companies? Is that what you mean when you gloss it over?
New loans, as we saw recently, loans that don't even have to be paid back, right? And to your point originally, they're not audited. The central bank has never been audited. It never will be audited. So we don't know what's going on underneath the hood.
Right. We don't even know if we have, and a lot of people, I mean, gold scholars that I follow, nobody even knows if there's even any gold in Fort Knox. And I mean, I guess it doesn't matter anymore because we're not even on it, but we didn't even know how much they had. And to your other point, I ran a seminar one time, and there was a Iraqi veteran in my seminar that came up to me after, and we were talking, and I had said some passive remark about, I don't know, war or something. And I ended up sitting down with dinner with him that week. He told me he was in the raid when they went and sacked Saddam's, whole system, and they went and got a bunch of gold. He said that's what he told me.
Of course, that money is the means and the ends of all warfare, right? It's what we use to go to war, and it's the reason we go to war. Anyone that tells you anything different doesn't understand economics, right? We may think we're going to bring democracy to the world or end terrorism or whatever narrative is being perpetrated, but war is extremely expensive. You cannot justify it unless there is a way to fund it and something that you're getting that's valuable at the end of it, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of in a nutshell how we got to this paper today. That it's as if central banks hijacked the consciousness of humanity, because the consciousness of humanity, the free market, selected gold as money, right? But gold had this failing in that it wasn't good at moving across space. So we introduced paper as a matter of convenience to increase its transactability. But then governments corrupted the trust placed in them, or we should say central banks, and governments control central banks. It's an insidious relationship. We don't know which one controls which, actually. And that's where we're at today. The world is dominated by this pyramid scheme we call fiat currency. It's organized crime at scale. And as I argue in the piece, Masters and Slaves of Money, it is an institution of slavery. It's less visible. We don't observe people in chains. But when you look at how many human hours are stolen I quantified this, by the Federal Reserve per year, they're stealing 23.4 billion hours per year for the past 40 years. And if you
mean
look at
from the 8 billion people in the world, or from the working people, or what do you mean?
Dollar users, dollar users is estimated to be 4 or 5 billion people worldwide, right? It's a lot. It's way larger than the U.S. population. But the trade is this: is that you and I sacrifice our time and energy for this dollar, right? That someone else can produce with no cost. They can just press print. But when they press print, they're diluting your savings. They're diluting your effort. They're stealing your time, right? So they're able. Did you ever see the movie Office Space? Yeah. Where they try to write this algorithm that steals a little bit from everyone so no one notices. Right. That's exactly what central banking is. It tends to steal a little bit, right? 2% annual inflation. Right. When you hear the word inflation, by the way, this is a euphemism. Sounds good. My wages are going up, my stocks are going up, my house is going up. They're stealing from you. What's actually happening is the dollar is going down relative to all these things. So they're trying, when they say they're targeting 2% inflation, they're trying to pull the office space scheme. They're trying to steal just enough from you to make it unnoticeable. But as we get into times like 2020 with COVID, we've accelerated the production of money 1,300% this year.
Wow.
We printed $3 trillion this year. It took us 5 years to print the last $3 trillion. And at the end of the 20th century, it took us 20 years to print $3 trillion. So it's accelerating. This time theft is accelerating. And that, I argue, is at the heart of all these socioeconomic and moral breakdowns in the world today.
I agree with you. Everything you said, especially the last part, that's what's challenging to me. And that's when you look at the funding behind a lot of social justice movements. That's why you find elites are funding it, because it's a great distraction from the real problem, right? Like, which is the same problem that we are discussing that you've been talking about this whole time. And that's what gets really hairy, because they know they've got to keep everyone pitted up against each other to keep this larger Ponzi scheme going. Right. So everybody thinks it's the white person's fault or it's the business owner's fault, and they don't understand what's happening at the top of the pyramid. And it's interesting that so much of that is coming to the surface this year, while so much of the pieces of the hoses of the financial engine are starting to blow. All of a sudden, there's just full haywire in the social justice movements and the pitted against, and whether it's race relations or political relations. It's a nice melodrama that distracts everyone. So where do we go from here? I mean, right now, as of the time of us, so it's November 20th today, and we already had 75. I know you know all these stats. We already had 75% of people living paycheck to paycheck in America. We already had almost I forget the data, but like almost nobody could come up with $400 for an emergency. This was before people lost their jobs. This is before they got locked into their house. Right. And so there's been no new stimulus. We were told, for your average person, it's a lot of them. It's food or no food. And that's why you're seeing these food banks around the corner in Dallas. I lived in Maui for 3 years. We just left when the quote unquote pandemic started. It breaks my heart. I mean, half the damn island, it's 45% unemployment. And right. you see these drone videos, and you're just like, Jesus Christ, man. Yeah. And it's like, I guess I'm curious. You're such a thinker. What do you think happens? I mean, they said this is what, a 6-week or 4-week shutdown or something, and they gave people their PPP money and their stimulus for 6 weeks. It's turned into 39 weeks. They're doing new rounds of lockdowns. I mean, what happens in 2021? I mean, then there's a crowd that says, you guys are all crying wolf. There is no inflation, and they say people like you and me are idiots, and this will go on for another 50 years. Like, what happens, in 2021? I mean, maybe by December 14th, there'll be more clarity around the electoral stuff with Trump and Biden. But what do you think happens in 2021? I mean, I'm like, geez Louise. I mean, I just moved out of California. As soon as the lockdowns ended, we got out of there before the next round. And we just finished getting situated. They instituted the new curfews. So, I mean, Robert, it scares me. I mean, I'm being honest. I mean, I really made this channel just to hopefully contribute a little to helping people be a little bit more prepared. But the reason I interview everyone is because, I'm out of answers. I mean, of what occurs. I'm like, I'm just like, are they going to let people open up? Are they just going to print the currency till it collapses in 2021? Then there's I'm sure you heard of Brett Johnson and Santiago Capital, and he says we're going to have deflation. And there's the people that say there'll be a huge demand for dollars. And I mean, what occurs, Robert? What's your prediction on 2021?
Well, I'll try to give you a little bit of a short-term answer and hopefully a longer-term answer too. I think, and people really need to be prepared to approach this open-minded, because it does take a reframing of your worldview to really comprehend what's going on here. First of all, with the voting, right? We in Western democracies all think that the best way to express our preferences is by voting, right? We're taught it's our civil duty. We're taught that's the way we reflect our opinion in the world. And that's marginally true, right? This is the system we live in today in the US is much better in comparison to a lot of the systems that have prevailed historically, right? We've become more sovereign.
Right.
However, there's only one system of voting where your voice cannot be muted, and that it's expressed clearly, and that is through money, right? It's where you spend your money and where you save your money. And that's, we think there's going to be a difference by putting a Biden or a Trump or a red versus blue into the White House, but they're all subservient to the same master. They all take donations, political contributions from banks, right? They never talk about this. They never talk about the monopolization of our money. They never say, hey, ever since we went off the gold standard in 1971, all these things went haywire. Maybe we should go back to a hard money standard.
Right.
The point being that the sinful nature of man always gives in to the temptation for corruption, right? We can't, there's no man-made, man-governed institution that doesn't become corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we're looking at Bitcoin through that lens. Bitcoin is an incorruptible substance. It's a money supply that can't be changed or violated. So when you put your savings into Bitcoin, you're casting a vote against every politician, every police state, and every policy worldwide. You're saying, none of this, I will not be governed by this system. I'm going to live in a system in which I am self-sovereign. And as far as where we're going in the short run, like inflation, deflation, these terms get thrown around to, I think, overly complexify things. But deflation is just your dollars becoming more valuable. Inflation is becoming less valuable. So in times of uncertainty, we can think of money actually as an insurance policy on the uncertainty of the future. So money gives you the ability to buy anything in the marketplace, right? So it lets you be prepared for unforeseen happenings. So when things get really uncertain, as we saw in March 2020, the demand for dollars tends to spike, right? People want optionality, so they want to buy dollars. So you get a spike of deflation, and dollars become much more valuable, right? The response to that typically is, okay, central banks want to intercede now. They want to bail out these hedge funds. They want to give cheap loans to people. This increases the supply of money over time, and then the dollar starts to inflate over a long period of time. So I think we do have another deflationary gut check in the next, who knows, 2 to 5 years. And at that time, the Federal Reserve is going to throw everything they've got at it. They're probably going to make their balance sheet legal tender, which will be step one to hyperinflation of the US dollar.
Can you explain, what do you mean they're going to make their balance sheet legal? What does that mean?
That means that today the Fed has some restraints on it and how they actually create money. They loan reserves to banks that banks then create money on top of.
Right.
This would allow the Federal Reserve to directly monetize, to directly issue money into the economy.
Okay, so that's like if people talking about like the Fed coin, where they're like, here, we'll send you money. That's okay. That's what you're saying.
But again, it sounds great, right? It's like, oh, great, we'll just, and this is where
it sounds terrible.
Well, if you think one layer deep, people are like, of course, just print more money. Everything will be fine. If we're out of money, print more money. Sounds wonderful. That's what MMT, the modern monetary theory, it's a descriptive philosophy for what's happening. They're like, yeah, we can just print money. We can print as much as we want. It doesn't matter. Which is totally ignorant, by the way.
Right.
Anyone that's listening. It has consequences, right? When you create more claims on savings and there's no growth in savings, you're just diluting everyone's claims. So I think there's one more deflationary punch. The central banks will then throw everything they have at it to try and mitigate this deflation. And that will lead to hyperinflation at some point. It will sow the seeds for hyperinflation. In the longer run, where we're going, I would encourage everyone, and I talk about this book on all of the shows that I do. It's called The Sovereign Individual. This was written in 1997. It predicted social media. It predicted anonymous digital cash, and it predicted some other major impacts of digital technology on the nation state. The general thesis of the book is that software was going to eat the world, and it's also going to eat, and which we already see a lot of today, right? Digital age is up and running. Every industry has been impacted. Every industry is in the technology business. But they make a strong argument that once something like Bitcoin emerges, where there's a place to put your capital in cyberspace that cannot be inflated, corrupted, or confiscated, that our entire conception of the nation state would start to shrink and shrivel. Because the federal government in the United States, it's a business model built on theft, right? They send you a tax bill, you didn't negotiate that rate. They inflate the currency supply, you have no say-so in that. And if you don't comply, they'll just shut down your bank account. They'll take your money, right, via the IRS. So this whole thing, like we're trapped in this prison. And the thesis of the book is that once an anonymous digital, you could call it a central bank in cyberspace emerges, which is effectively what Bitcoin is, that people would start to exit. They're going to exit the system where they're being robbed and move into a system where they have total liberty and self-sovereignty. And I think that's what's happening. Like a lot of this book has been amazingly prescient. Again, written in 97, it predicted the impact social media would have on mainstream media, how it would fragment it. It would make all of us producers and consumers. And it predicted this, the rise of Bitcoin and how it would fragment our concept of the nation state.
Interesting. So do you think that basically then we're headed into this frame over the next, and first of all, also, I mean, then you see, I'm sure you're aware of, I made a video on it yesterday, and I'm sure you're aware of the topic of the Great Reset. And, the Fed has said they're collaborating with MIT and, they're going to have their enslavement coin, which is what they should call it instead of Bitcoin. Yep, sure. So do you think we're headed towards that, where basically pretty soon here, when they really need to pump the guns, they're going to be like, hey, here's this thing, and then they'll phase cash out and they'll try to just put the total juice in it over the next 5 or 10 years, Zimbabwe type of style, and we'll just, after, a little, maybe we have some more deflationary shocks as through this quote unquote virus and lockdown and stuff. And then you just think it's going to resort to print, and inflation starts to rise. What do you think the governments do at that point if people are starting to be like, we're exiting this? Then what do you think happens?
Well, that's, again, the history of humanity is the building of these institutions to serve a purpose, right? To mobilize humanity at scale, right? That's what a lot of these government, central bank, that's the purpose these institutions serve. But the other purpose of humanity is to overthrow these institutions when they become worn out, right? That's the entire history of humanity. We build it up. When it's no longer useful, we tear it down and we rebuild again. So people have the power. It's just a matter of unifying our efforts, right? And these things you hear, like the Great Reset and the new normal, this is propaganda being pushed worldwide, right? Like I'm in Indonesia today, I see the same signs and same little pithy statements being recited on billboards and by people here as we saw in the US. This is a coordinated propagandistic effort to get people accustomed to wearing masks and accepting that things are going to change. And there was an advertisement recently by the IMF saying by the year 2030, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
And it said you'll have no privacy. That was the other line. It said you'll on that thing. The other line, it said you'll own nothing, you'll have no privacy, and you'll be happy. That's what it said.
Unfucking believable.
I know.
they're very blatant about it. And so this actually too was predicted in the book, The Sovereign Individual, that when the nation state started to realize it was facing an existential threat in the digital age through software, it would start to try to use every lever it had to enforce its borders, to enforce divisiveness between people. It actually predicted that a pandemic was the easiest way to do this, right? Institute a pandemic worldwide. All of a sudden you have a reason to close down your borders, a reason to print money, a reason to drive separation amongst people. Again, if the power of people is in their unification, of course the state is going to fight back by trying to create division, right? That is their greatest threat. They are a parasite on the host, which is us, the productive economy, people that create value in the world. Government does not create value. It only confiscates value from productive people. So it needs to maintain some semblance of control on the host organism to maintain its existence. And that's why I consider Bitcoin to be a battle for truth, the restoration, frankly, of truth, of freedom, and of virtue in the world, right? There is no better way to reclaim who we are in a natural law perspective, right? Each of us with the God-given right to the pursuit of life, the pursuit of liberty, and the pursuit of property. Anyone or anything that tries to violate any of those is a tyrant by definition, and we cannot allow that, right? We've just look at history. Any tyrant, they've always tried to do first, they try to suppress the voice of dissent. So any aspiring dictator historically has tried to first silence the voice of dissent, right? Because the greatest threat to the state is poignant intellectual criticism, right? The whole thing is a construct of the imagination, right? It's an idea construct. So if we can attack the idea and draw criticisms to it, that is the threat to the entire edifice that is.
So do you believe that then that phase is happening right now then?
Well, that's where the battle is, right? It's a battle for free speech, ultimately. This is why free speech is so important, that anyone can articulate a counterpoint and go to battle in the space of ideas so that our bodies don't have to, right? If you don't have free contention in the space for ideas, then people go to kinetic battle. So in the digital age, I think we have two polar opposites, one equally terrifying, one equally promising. And the one that's terrifying is this potential of a 1984 style Orwellian future. And the one that's promising is liberation through dissident technology. So are you still there?
Yep, I can hear you.
All right, I'm going to put the book under my computer again.
No worries.
For some reason, my laptop gets hot and the internet here gets weird.
Yeah, well, you're in Indonesia, so your internet's to be expected. Well, I mean, you make me a little bit more optimistic. I'm not, my concern is how many people are, they bought the propaganda through and through and through in every way, shape, and form. They get mad at you if you criticize the fact that governments are locking people in their house on a virus that has a 99.9998% survival. And my concern is over that. And it's clearly that's, we're headed to the apex of that kind of free speech, as you said, free speech, information awakening type of war. And I guess if you look at it from a more cosmic perspective, it's like these forces know they're losing their power. So they're throwing more and more and more chaos at the pile. I also, to your earlier point, one of the ways I really woke up was I actually watched Alex Jones' documentary Endgame. I was 19. I was a freshman in college. And this was like my final straw when I dropped out after I had asked my teacher why we couldn't audit the Federal Reserve. He talked about how their plan was to, put everyone on a one world digital currency that they control, use a pandemic to do it. And so to me, it's been a little scary because that was 10 years ago. And I look back and I'm like, all these things are like actually happening right now. What do you think are the best ways that people can be prepared, right? Like, what do we, so for someone listening that's like awake, like they realize that this is happening and that this is a spiritual war taking place. What are the steps that are necessary for us to all do as individuals to free ourselves from, as you said, money slaves and masters, for us to become our own masters and break free from this?
Yeah, so we have seen this dynamic play out before, right? We saw in the 20th century, there was an ideological contention between Soviet communism and American capitalism. And Soviet communism was premised on this false belief, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, right? This very beautiful sounding utopian vision. But what it did by trying to replace the profit motive of capitalism with devotion to nationalistic faith or devotion to the nation, essentially, is it eliminated the incentives for people to cooperate and compete economically, right? And that's what drove the implosion of Soviet Russia. It's that its economy collapsed, its productive economy imploded, because you can't have a centrally controlled market. It is less intelligent than a distributed market, right? In a distributed market, you're assimilating the intelligence of everyone through their trade decisions. When you try and replace the collective intelligence of, say, 300 million people in the US with 30,000 people in a price-setting bureaucracy, it's a matter of distributed computing versus centralized computing. And centralized computing fails, right? So we saw capitalism, or the closest approximation we had to it, free market capitalism, outcompeted Soviet communism in the 20th century. And what I think we're seeing in the 21st century is monetary communism, which is central banking, right? They've taken it's straight out of Marx's 1848 manifesto to the Communist Party, is that the fifth measure is to have a central bank. And they've taken that, plucked that one piece out of the communist playbook and applied it to the capitalist playbook. So we have a free market pretty much in everything except money, right? We have communist money. And the battle in the 21st century, I think, is between monetary communism and monetary capitalism, which is Bitcoin, right? And the word capitalism, it's got a bad rap, but it doesn't actually exist in the world today. Again, because at the heart of everything is this institution of communism, which is the central bank. So in terms of how we can prepare, there's no greater investment one can make other than knowledge, right? You have to study this. You need to ask yourself these hard questions. You need to do your homework, right? I would encourage everyone to read the book, The Sovereign Individual. It was a huge eye-opener to me. There have been many, many books that have changed my worldview. But The Sovereign Individual, I think, is the best map for the territory we are going into, right? This transformation into the information age. Also, the best thing you can do in conditions of uncertainty is, again, have optionality, right? There's an emerging practice called multi-flag theory, where people are getting passports and citizenship agreements in multiple jurisdictions. And what this does is it gives you an option. If one country gets super tyrannical or passes a law you don't like, or things go really south really fast, you can then move somewhere else very quickly and easily. And it's much easier to do this now, to start and get obtaining passports now when they're not as in high demand as they will be in 5 or 10 years, right? So I would encourage people to check that out. It's called multi-flag theory. You can Google it and look into it. You're basically developing citizenship optionality. And then I would say to study Bitcoin. And as you come to understand it a little more closely, consider allocating savings into Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the only asset in the world that is totally agnostic of government, right? There's no decision, no governmental decision on earth can impact the Bitcoin network. They can impact the endpoints, but no one can change the money supply. No one can change the rules. You can't counterfeit Bitcoin. You can't inflate it. Anyone with a private key can spend it. No one can change these rules, right? It's almost like it's a super state or something. It's separate from government entirely. And that becomes increasingly important in an age where, all of our property rights are just government IOUs. The government can seize any property you have at any time. That's your real estate, that's your automobile, that's your cash in your bank account. Any of that can be seized by government. There's only one untouchable asset in the world, and that is Bitcoin. That's why it represents the ultimate form of monetary optionality. So that's it. Study, arm yourself with knowledge, and then arm yourself with optionality, both of the monetary and citizenship varieties.
I think the word optionality is really important, as you said, as it pertains to multi-flagging. I interviewed Mark Moss the other day. I knew you were on his channel. Brilliant guy. And off air, he was telling me he's thinking about pulling the trigger on a passport out in the Caribbean for his family, which got me looking into it. And I hate that I have to look into it, but I'm not, it just doesn't look good. I mean, it just, the tyranny is so strong, especially emotionally and mentally. And that's how they really enslave people, right? You slave people with the money and the whole thing. But once you control people's emotions and their minds, they're goners. And so that's why I think the word optionality, I like that word, is really important in a lot of ways too. And one of the ways that I also think it's really important is some type of essentially a wealth creation instrument or vehicle, with whatever it is for you in some form of an additional business skill, service, because as we've seen, the problem is if you have one option and the government in the state, in the zip code or imaginary border you live in says you will be arrested if you open this business and you work for somebody else's business, so they shut it down or lay you off, then you're immediately then when you really, if you're really an evil person, like the most, like if you're essentially demonic, and you and I were like that, we truly wanted to control the entire world, this is the best way to do it. I mean, because as soon as everyone loses everything and you keep going, no, can't come back yet, you're gonna die if you do, and you get everyone that is beholden to the system, and it really becomes the World Economic Forum's, all their propaganda videos. I mean, if you're objective enough, they're really just advertising communism to you. That's what they're advertising it, but they're doing it by using moral high ground words. So if you're woke, you go, you're right. And so they're really ushering you into communism, and that happens when we don't have options. And that's why one of the things I did a video on the Great Reset yesterday, and I talked about 7 ways to prepare. And one of them is additional sources of income that to the best of your ability, you control. And I guess a little rant on a subsection of optionality. It's such an important word because if we don't have options, then we don't have our free will. If we don't have our free will, then we have communism that is slowly engulfing us.
Right. I think those are some great points. And I find it interesting, and I like to look at this in myself too, is that feeling you expressed in the beginning where you said you hate to have to do it, right? It's like, oh man, America's not working out. It's like you feel like you're not patriotic or something, right? We have this conditioned belief that we're like, America, fucking exceptionally great, and it's the land of the free and the home of the brave, and I should never have to go anywhere else in the world. But I think that's just an illusion. I think it's just an illusion.
And also it scares me having you have a 2-year-old, I have a 4-month-old, it just scares me, man. I mean, like, because, you know, the G20, it's not an American patriotic banker that's doing all this. This is a globalist agenda that wants a one world government. That is this whole G20 movement, and the CIA goes in and kills all these small presidents, rigs the elections with their voting softwares in these other countries, and it just like it concerns me. And it's one of the reasons when I find people like yourself and like Mark, and when I find people that inspire me, and Mark really gave me a lot more optimism. I'm just like, what do we do? And I mean, I guess, do you stand and do you fight, or do you say it's up to me to create my own sovereignty, and everyone's on their own free will journey as a soul, and I'm not here to break everybody's windows, so to speak, to try to wake them up if they're not ready. And as a soul, if I have to leave this land, then I have to leave it. How do you look at that? Like how do you look at that?
Well, I think the soul point, first of all. I actually think, and I express this in some of my writing, that I think we're more of a collective organism, actually, right? That is this experience of spirituality that you can't really articulate. It doesn't fit into words, but there's a connection between us all. Mm-hmm. I think we do share a soul in a ways. And that's why I think the battle is it's not even it's higher than the ideological space. It is good or evil, right? Central banking is evil, right? It's exploiting the vulnerabilities of people. And it wraps itself, to your point, in this moralistic camouflage, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you're going to own nothing and be happy and have fun. Like, and all the social justice stuff, like, it's all a deception. It's all a veil of falsehood to cover itself. And what it actually is, to your point, it has a cold-blooded beating heart of zero, right? These are just bankers calculating their profit and loss on this institution of slavery, right? Which, by the way, I know that sounds radical. People are like, what do you mean? But just look at the history of your species. We have enslaved one another since we've been walking, right? It's nonstop.
Yeah.
It's just become more insidious and invisible in the modern age. That's it. And we talked a lot about all of this moves, right, based on optionality, right? It's a battle to increase individual optionality. And make sure that we have more freedom and the ability to make decisions independently of any authority, right? To establish our own sovereignty. And that's why Bitcoin and the concept of money is so important, because money is the crux of that entire system, frankly, right? If they have control and monopoly over the money supply, then the state has unlimited optionality. They can harvest as much of your time and wealth and resources as they need to perpetrate their schemes. If, however, your savings are instead stored in Bitcoin in a place that cannot be compromised or corrupted, you're actually you're moving your life energy out of this system and into an incorruptible system. And you're taking away the optionality of the state, right? They no longer have the option to inflate the money supply, to go to war, or to do whatever they want. Any of these bureaucracies they create, they're all funded through inflation and taxation. And when you move into a money that's independent of government, you're decreasing their optionality and increasing your own. So it's very much at the heart of this entire discussion. And the other way to think about it is that money is a medium it's actually increasing the extensibility of our minds, right? So when we think, we're using rationality, which the root word is ratio. So we're weighing this thing against that thing, right? This potential course of action against this other, and we're deciding which of the two is better, which of the two, based on the avatars and aspects of the situation we've visualized, which course of action do we actually want to put in play? And money is just the actual medium we're using to weigh two things against each other, right? That's what a price is. Instead of saying this car costs 14 chairs. You say this car costs $40,000, which is equal to 14 chairs, right? It is an extension of our rationality in the world. So it is the mind. It is the collective mind. Money is the collective mind. And we have a parasite, a mind parasite on it called the central bank today. So it's a lot of ways of pointing to this thing. It just comes down to this battle between freedom and tyranny, right? Do we want to optimize a society for liberty such that people can create their own outcomes, right? That, again, freedom to have life, to have liberty and property? Or do you want to create a system that preys on those rights of others, right? And it's a natural, albeit evil, human tendency to want to prey on people, to prey on other people's property, right? If I can sit back in my seat at the G20 conference and just press a button and make myself wealthier, I'm going to do that all day, as long as that the host that I am extracting from stays alive. So this is very much a parasite-host relationship in a biological sense. And the digital age just offers us these tools to wake up to it and hopefully free ourselves from a lot of it. Government doesn't go away completely, but we can try and make government more like a free market participant, where we actually negotiate the rates at which they protect us. What services do they provide at what price? Just like any other entity we do business with, right? We negotiate the terms. We're no longer subjects of the government, we become customers of the government. And that's where I'm optimistic for the future. I think the transition's rough, but the outcome is good.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you're saying. I love everything you're saying. Then the pessimistic side of me goes, so like, how do we cross that chasm? I've never even seen anybody, the only time I've ever seen, and I could be wrong, maybe somebody's done it, but I've never seen somebody campaign that one of their top 5 agendas was term limits. I've never even seen somebody talk about it. And that was on Trump's list. And I think that there's going to be a lot tighter grip that they're going to run on this political system now. And I'm like, so like, how do you get to that point of, like, I was like, man, that would be such a good first step if we could just have term limits on these idiots, because then it creates, so like, how do we get to that? Is it there needs to be a collapse and everybody wants to go burn down stuff? Like, how do you get to that point? Does enough money have to exit the system and then it occurs as a natural, like, cosmic phenomena, do you think, once enough energy moves away from control of the parasite?
Yeah, so there's this concept in economics called the inequality of exchange. And it's exactly that. When two systems become imbalanced enough, an exchange occurs, right? If one, and this is in physics, right? If your room is cold by your air conditioner and the outside is hot, there's an exchange outward, right? That heat's coming into the room. So there does have to reach, I think, with a lot of these institutional shifts, a critical mass or a breaking point where the purpose that it served originally, the cost of it are now outweighed significantly enough by the cost it's creating that something happens, right? It breaks down and is reformed. And the path to that energetic transfer, the gateway of that is Bitcoin, right? It's moving your time, which money is just your time, energy, efforts. You're moving the storage of that from a system that can be plundered into a system that gives you maximum sovereignty, maximum control over your time, energy, and value. And as that transition occurs, I think we're actually, and this is argued in the book again, Sovereign Individual, that we're going to wake up to this hallucination of politics. Why do we have a popularity contest to decide who gets to pass the rules at what rate they will steal from us via taxation and what rules we have to comply with morally? what sense does this actually make?
None to me. I mean,
Right. Yeah. So politics, the entire charade that is politics, becomes less relevant in a Bitcoin world, right? Because all of a sudden, as governments can no longer feast on the savings of society, they start to naturally shrink. And if they naturally shrink, then citizens have more optionality as to what governance system works for them, right? Instead of 200 countries, maybe we move to a world that has more like 20,000. This could take 100 years, this could take 200 years, it could take 1,000 years, who knows? But it gives us, when there's political strife, right, two different contrasting worldviews, instead of fighting it out for a popularity contest and force one side to comply with the other's view, you just fork the society. This half of the citizenry would just go to this country over here instead, who is practicing a worldview or legally enforcing a worldview that's more consistent, right, with their population. So it becomes a more freely competitive marketplace. And again, back to Economics 101, free market competition is the way we discover true prices, we innovate, and we actually decrease prices over time, right? We become smarter by competing. That's what business is. We're all trying to satisfy wants, better, faster, cheaper, and the net outcome of that is a positive sum game for humanity. So that's another way to look at Bitcoin's value proposition very deeply and very clearly, is that it is the depoliticization of money, right? We're taking politics out of money for good, and you're leaving free market actors free to determine the social systems that under which they can best operate. So we're amplifying the voice of the people by moving into Bitcoin, and we're I think waking up to this, what I call as a hallucination of politics. We don't need to democratically elect one ape to rule 300 million in the US. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I like that term. Waking up to the mass political hallucination. I've been thinking about what you just said. It's interesting you said it. I've never said it on the internet because it's such a weird thing to say, which is, I'm like, we're kind of getting to the point where I think you just got to divide the country up and be like, look, if you're like a libertarian, you go over here. If you're a socialist, you guys can go run your games over there. I don't think the power center wants that. And I think it's too much for most people's like brains to even comprehend. But I was listening to a talk with Doug Casey talking about that the other day. And you remind me a lot of him also because, that's his whole brand is international man and stuff. But yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it's a natural shift in consciousness that will decentralize border controls, that slowly certain areas create more freedom. And then people go, I want to be in that place more, which causes other governments to be less relevant or evolve if they don't, or else they're going to lose all their tax base. Maybe that's what will happen.
Yeah, well, the theme here is that digital technology has radically enhanced exchange, right? You and I are in two places of the world that we're exchanging right now. And that's imposing a free market paradigm on a world that's dominated by communism, right? So it's dominated today by top-down monetary authority. Right. But there's this huge bottom-up grassroots transformation occurring through digital tech. And at the confluence of those two forces, I think we're seeing these top-down institutions be eroded by software, right? All of a sudden, the government is becoming more accountable to its P&L, to its profit and loss statement. What I mean by that is they can't just print money to paper over their bad decisions. All of a sudden, they're accountable to those bad decisions, right? Like any business owner, any other business owner in the world, if you make bad decisions and you create losses for your entity, at some point it will go out of business, right?
Right.
That's true for any entrepreneur in the world. But governments have arrogated themselves this ability to not be subject to Darwinian natural selection, right?
Right.
They're papering over their own bad decisions by stealing value from the rest of us. And again, if we draw that analogy back to how did Soviet Russia collapse? It fragmented into 30 states, right? All the countries with Stan at the end that are around Russia now, that used to be part of the USSR, right? It was one giant, United States of Russia, if you will. And when it broke, it just fragmented, right? The groups fragmented. And I think even in the state constitution of Texas today, it maintains the right to secede from the Union. So Texas, in their state constitution, they have the right to separate at any time. I don't know when this is going to happen. My hope truly for America, by the way, America, best idea we ever had, best idea in history. It's based on three things, right? Respect for private property rights. Any part of nature you spend your time, energy, effort transforming, you own that. You have an exclusive right to that property, and you are free to trade it with others. If there are any disputes about that property, we have rule of law, which we got from the English common law tradition. Gives us the way to resolve disputes non-violently, right? We can go to court, we can litigate one another about our private property rights if they've been infringed upon or what have you, and we can settle it non-violently, right? And finally, honest money that couldn't be violated, right? The US Constitution gave all the states the authority to issue gold or silver currency, which was the most honest money we had at the time. That constitutional right has been revoked and monopolized by central banks. So Bitcoin is, when I say it's monetary capitalism, Bitcoin's the most American technology there's ever been in the ideal sense of America, right? The country America has we've moved far away from these pillars of free market capitalism. When we inflate the money supply, we're violating the private property rights of everyone. When we pass laws that are asymmetric, right? Certain bankers get bailouts, others of us do not. We've perverted the rule of law. And finally, the net outcome of the first two is that we have fiat currency, the most dishonest money in history. So we've gone from these ideals upon which America was founded, private property rights, sound rule of law, and honest money, and we've moved into this perverted version of it today. So my hope is that we can take, and we actually have a senator that just got elected, Cynthia in Wyoming. She's a pro-Bitcoin senator.
Yeah, she was interesting.
So I'm hoping we can just take this narrative back to the landscape of American politics and be like, guys, look, we screwed up. We veered far from the course on which this country was founded in 1776. It's time to get back on an honest monetary standard. And the most honest money in history is Bitcoin, right? It's the only substance no one can change. It's like the old adage, we have two certainties in life. We have death, we have taxes. Bitcoin is the third certainty. 21 million Bitcoin is a number that is beyond the grasp of humans. No one can politicize it. No one can manipulate it. No one can bend the rules of Bitcoin. So it's a equalized playing field, if you will. And it almost perfectly embodies the principles upon which America was founded.
Yeah, the Constitution. I remember when I was a freshman, when I was dropping out of college, I read the Constitution, and I was like probably sitting in my room smoking weed, reading the Constitution, and it was like the most it's very spiritual. It's very I think we would have a big change if instead of mailing random unsolicited ballots across America, they mailed the Constitution to everybody. So maybe that'll be a fun takeaway. If you haven't read it recently as a listener, would maybe be an interesting read to share with a friend as well.
And it's short.
Yeah,
it's not that long. It's a great read.
Robert, super, super interesting. You're a very interesting guy. Definitely a well-needed friend to humanity with a lot of interesting thoughts, I'd love to discuss them in further detail. I noticed after an hour, I do start to get more of a drop off, and we went like an hour, and we're at like almost 80 minutes right now of record time, and super fascinating stuff. For all the listeners, Robert has a lot of really interesting articles that he's written. There's many of them on Medium. One's addressed to Ray Dalio, but where can people find you? And also I'd love to, have you back on and talk more. I mean, there's so many, we could turn it into an 8-hour workshop with how much, really interesting philosophical, and historical, research that you have. So I'd love to do it again, but where can people find you?
Yeah. Thank you first of all for having me. I really do believe that the deeper you get into this stuff, the more you realize it is a moral imperative, right? We have to share with people the truth about freedom, about liberty, and how it's being compromised. There's no greater tool than digital tech to disseminate that. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for having me. I would point people to my Twitter page, probably the best place to go. My Twitter handle is Breedlove22. That's my last name.
I'll put the link in the description for someone to just scroll in and click it.
Cool. And it's spelled BREEDLOVE 22. And on my Twitter profile, I have links to my YouTube channel, which I just launched, where I'm basically consists of a lot of snippets of my prior media stuff, but I've also started interviewing other thought leaders in the space. My first guest is Michael Saylor. He's a guy that just invested $700 million into Bitcoin.
Yeah, that guy's interesting.
Yeah, we recorded for almost 11 hours. So we did a very deep dive on Bitcoin, history, technology. I also, there is my Medium page is linked, where I post all my writings. I wrote an open letter to Ray Dalio about Bitcoin. I wrote a piece called Masters and Slaves of Money that goes into the pyramid scheme that is fiat currency.
That one's interesting. And you have a lot of interesting interviews with that title for people that are interested in kind of the monetary history of enslavement. I think you probably put that together more succinctly than anybody I've come across.
Well, thank you very much. And there's one other piece that I wrote there called The Number Zero in Bitcoin. And this does a really deep dive into history and actually compares what I argue is the discovery of absolute scarce money, which Bitcoin represents. It compares that to the invention of the number zero and how much that changed the world. So that is my most popular piece, actually. And yeah, that's it. I've got a Patreon page set up. I'm writing a book. Working title is Time, Money, Soul, but I think I've got more than one book in me. So, and we also have a book coming out soon that I've co-authored with Jimmy Song. He's a major proponent in the Bitcoin space, and others. Working title is Thank God for Bitcoin. So we're actually comparing Bitcoin and its relationship to morality and Christianity. So I think that'll be very interesting for people. And yeah, thank you again for having me.
Yeah, super interesting. So I'll put the link for the Twitter. I'd love to have you back on. Any way I can help you, YouTube and stuff like that. Like I told you off air, that was where I did everything, was on YouTube with my other channel. So any way I can help you, and I'm sure you got the handle of all your book stuff too. But any way I can help you with that, I'd love to as well. I appreciate what you're doing. It's nice to, have someone that's doing such an incredible job of, we have a failed education system. So we need basically free market teachers to help recode everybody's minds. So I appreciate what you're doing.